You're still muted in case you weren't, unless you weren't already started.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Right. Dear Lord, though we are slow to learn, thank you, Lord, for your forbearance and honoring our efforts. And may you continue to guide our thoughts as we continue on this journey. Thank you, Lord. In Yeshua's beautiful name we pray. Amen. So, see, the time of God's destructive judgment is the time of mercy for, for those who have no opportunity to learn what is true. Earlier, we talked about the time of mercy. So here it is. Tenderly, the Lord will look upon them. His heart will be touched. The Lord's hand will be stretched out to save. While the Lord is saving some people, the door will be closed upon others. That is the story of Noah. The door is closed for the people, but it's open for the animals. It's closed upon them because they didn't want to enter before. Large numbers will be admitted in, and as they hear the truth for the first time, the Lord calls upon every believer to consecrate themselves. We are supposed to be working for God. This is Sunday law history. The whole context about these passages is about the Sunday law history and not the history of 9/11, paragraph 38. The divine statute, that's the commandments, have been set aside. The time will soon come when God will vindicate his authority. How will God prove their authority? God is going to the cities and destroying them, proving that God has got strength. The Lord comes out of this place to punish the earth. The earth will disclose its blood. Who may abide the day of the Lord's coming? Who shall stand when God appears? This history from the Sunday law to the seven plagues is the history that Ellen White is dealing with. When we take LS 411, Revelation 18, 1 through 4, and we try to make that fulfill 9/11, that is incorrect. Ellen White says the whole of chapter 8, Babylon comes to its end. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Ellen White says the whole of chapter 18, Babylon comes to its end in chapter 18. This is the history of the Sunday law. The Lord is going to arise and terribly shake the earth from the Sunday law to the second advent. 9T11. We're living in the time of the end. On page 14.2, time of the end, 1978. The world is stirred with war. The prophecy of Daniel 11 is nearly finished. Soon the scenes of trouble will take place. Daniel 11 goes into Daniel 12. Daniel 12, after speaking about the closing scenes, she says that there's going to be a time of trouble. Daniel 12:1 is the close of probation. Michael stands up, and there shall be time of trouble such as never was. So we're in the history of the time of the end. We can make 1798, 1989 a present application. Page 12.1. She is in New York, and she sees buildings being raised up, and she's going to see those buildings come down. 1912.3. As the buildings were going up, people forgot that in heaven, God was writing an account of their behaviors. They have cheated and stolen. The word forbearance is to forbear, which means not do. I'm supposed to do something, but I'm not going to do it. What is God supposed to do? But the Lord is not doing. Punish. When does God punish? After the forbearance. Another word for forbearance is probation. So there will be a limit to the forbearance. This also could mean great patience. So the patience of God ends at the close of patience. The passage says people will learn that there's going to be a limit to probation. What happens afterwards? No more forbearance. The next paragraph says, the next scene that came was the alarm of fire. When is the fire? Before or after patience? After. Fire is after the probation closes. The fire burnt the buildings. The fire engines weren't able to work. Now that's interesting because I don't know if we go back to the first 9/11, what, 22 years ago? Fire engines back then had trouble working because of all the dust, all the smoke. So, when this is a harbinger, it's interesting that not only the buildings were mentioned, the buildings that went up and it came down and burnt, but also the fire engines weren't working is also the harbinger of the fire engines not working at the Sunday law.
Well, she's talking now after probation closes, right? Or did I follow that right? Fire is after probation closes.
Right. But what I'm saying is that 9/11, 2001, 9/11 event was a
Right,
harbinger of what's to happen in the Sunday law. Here she is saying the Sunday law, the fire burnt the buildings. The fire engines were able to work. The same thing happened with the fire engines 22 years ago.
right.
They also weren't able to work effectively because of all the dust, all the ashes that were in the air.
Right. But what she, if I followed correctly, and help me if I got this wrong, is that this word forbearance, because that's what he brings out later as well, is that word forbearance. When the limit to God's forbearance, the limit to God's forbearance, meaning it comes to an end, which is not Sunday law, but the actual close of probation, and that there is no more mercy beyond that limit. There's no probation, no more mercy. So if I'm following that statement correctly, then the fire that burns the buildings and the fire engines are not able to work is not Sunday law history, but after close of probation. Am I reading that wrong or hearing that wrong?
You know, is well, I don't think he specified because there's two close of probation, right? One for the people, one for the uh, God's people, and one for the world. If,
Mhm.
for God's people, probation closes at Sunday law, and for the world, closes at the close of probation, right? So I'm not sure which one this one's talking about.
Maybe that's because these things developed from here and on. So I'm trying to place back when, because this is 2019, you said, right?
Yes.
Because Elder Test put the lines up with the fractals and the the history. Let's see, the history or the close of probation for the world is actually, for if you're looking at the Nethinims, their close of probation, gotta think this through, is the Sunday law because their harvest, based on the fractal, their harvest is actually that period of Sunday law to the actual close of probation. And that we talked about that briefly. I think that's to work towards a development as you go through it, that um that the loud cry is actually, we talked about it just recently, that the loud cry is actually for who then? But then you go to Matthew and you'd see that it's God's people in the world. Yeah, I don't know. And we would be among, prayerfully, God's people in the world. It would be for those that are in this movement, in the 144,000. So I don't know. I don't want to add confusion to it. It's just I have that still set in my mind, and I might be wrong, but I still have that set in my mind. This probation closes on the Nethinim's line, which is the world, at the Sunday law, and then it's their harvest. Is that correct?
On the fractal, yes.
And so on the big line is the 144,000. So that close of probation is not for the world. That close of probation is for God's people in the world. Is that right? And yes, for the institution, Sunday law is the close of probation. That's the United States and the church. Yeah, we definitely have to review the lines when we go through these things as well.
Yes.
I'll let you keep going, sorry.
Yeah. No, those are all good points. The close of probation closes different time for different people in the institution.
Yeah,
So yeah, so a review of that would be helpful.
yeah.
But the close of probation for the Levites and priests will be Sunday law. Are we saying that
For the church, yes.
for the church?
Probation for the church. And I'm actually working on the studies, Gloria, that I think you're watching too. The France ones in is it 2018? If you know what.
Yeah. Which one? Which one are you watching?
I'm doing from a few of the beginning ones and trying to put it all together.
Yeah.
I lost my point of what I was going to say based on what you just said.
So are we saying for individual is different?
No,
but
no.
the
I remember the point I was going to say, because he's pointing out that, we know that the Sunday law is a close of probation for, it's first the church, then the world, right? But then if it's first the church, then the world, why is it? Oh, I'm trying to think of how he said it. Because how he walks you through it, you'll see that it's the church because it's God's people in the world. And so how do you say that it's first the church and then the world? And I think there's something there we have to understand. There's something still there that we have to understand, because it is first the church, then the world, but it's God's people in the world. It's actually this movement that last close of probation on the line, where there's no more mercy, where there is no more mercy, that close of probation, that's on the big line of the 144,000. And the line of the Nethinims, their close of probation was the Sunday law, and it's their harvest from Sunday law to close of probation.
Elaine?
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to throw in a thought here. I'm having flashbacks of when we were watching Elder Tess presenting some of this stuff more rudimentarily, and she was showing, when you're looking at all the lines, the probation lines for everyone, and I remember her drawing little stick figures underneath where the probations were, and it was very clear that for the priests, which was November 9th, 2019, and then for the 144,000, she had stick figures drawn like standing on top of each other. Okay, because it all happens at the same time. It's not a period of time. It is a moment of time. And she was very clear to point out that the Levites, whose probation begins, at their probation ends and is done by the time the Sunday law is here in full effect. That's when their probation is closed, but that whole dispensation prior prior to the Sunday law happening, that's when they had the opportunity to come in then, because their probation isn't a single moment of time, it is a period of time. And so it follows along with what Elaine was suggesting, because you look at first the church and then the world, but the world really isn't the world, it's God's people in the world. So it's really the two-step of the church. And for the priests, it's all at once. And for the 144,000, it's all at once. And for the Levites and for the Nethinims, or the 11th hour workers, it's over a period of time. But my understanding is when Michael stands up at the end, when probation is closed, it's closed on the entire world.
Yes.
Okay. It's just that when Michael stands up, then that's the end of the probationary dispensation that had been provided for God's children that are in the world. And then, but once Michael stands up, I mean, at that same time, that's when the probation of the 144,000 is also done. It's closed, and they won't be sinning anymore, and they'll be waiting for a death decree to be decreed, and Christ is going to show up in the clouds just in time to save them from that. So, it's one of those things. It takes a lot of thought to keep it all together. But I just never forgot the fact that the stick figures, were for the Levites and for the 100, excuse me. Yeah, for the Levites and for the Nethinims, their sticks were all like side by side, like they're holding hands, because it's during that whole dispensation that they could come in,
During their harvest.
Right, it's during their harvest, but our harvest happens in a moment. I guess that's the right way to say it. Our harvest happens in a moment with the priests and for the 144,000, whereas for them it's over a period of time. So that was my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's complicated, got a whole lot in there. And then Sarah asked, so when is the close probation for individuals? My understanding is for individuals, you can close your own probation at any time. I don't know if there was anything more to that, but that's what I remember and understand it to be. You personally, individually, because God isn't saving individuals. God isn't saving individuals. God is saving groups.
It's true when you look at the world too, because look back at the time of the flood, people closed their probations before. God doesn't close anyone's probation. They close their own probation.
Right.
And so people make their own choices, and maybe these people don't recognize when they've actually crossed that invisible line of forbearance, I like to call it. But there is an invisible line of forbearance, and once a human being, no matter who you are, once you cross that line, God knows you're never going to come back. And he might allow you to live for a period of time after that and still be alive and breathing, but it doesn't mean that you have any more hope of being heaven bound. And I'm hopefully thinking that he puts people like that in the grave quickly, because all they can do is be an influence for the wrong side.
Right.
Anyway.
Thank you for all the wonderful input. A lot to think about.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Phil. I just had a comment.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, Bob's correct. I agree with that thinking, and he made it more specific with the lines. And my thought was going to God's people in the world. And is that's not saying it's the 144,000 who are God's people, but it's God's people that are called out of Babylon. Yeah, I just need more clarity on that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because the people in Babylon would be not God's people, the 144,000, but it's the 144,000 that call the people out of Babylon. in the third angel's message.
Amen.
Is that correct?
Yes, during the Sunday law, the third angel.
Yeah. So we give the call to
What does
come
it
out of
look like?
Babylon.
Yeah.
We're
what does
not
that look
in
like?
Babylon, so we aren't God's people in the world. It's the Nephilim sin.
Can't
Yeah,
answer right now.
Yeah, it's just a thought. I mean, I know we have more to learn, a lot more.
I,
in
I
this
think
field.
that's the work that we're preparing for. That's the work, the loud cry,
Yes,
that we need to go through that. And according to the School of the Prophet in 2018, we need to go through that in order to go through the our temptation. So it's part of our salvation, and our work. Yeah.
amen. Thank you, Gloria.
you. God is strong to save. And what will the Lord show after that? Strong to destroy. God is strong to save. God is strong to destroy. How does the God destroy? With fire. No earthly power can stop God's hand. No material will prevent the destruction from happening. When God's appointed time comes to send retribution, revenge on the men because they disregarded God's law. What law? Sunday law. So once again, when the fire engines are not working, when the buildings are being destroyed, it's not 9/11, but at the close of probation. This is only the surface reading. We can go into much more detail and show the same thing from other passages. Whether you go to Review and Herald or to the testimony to the churches, what is being referred to is the Sunday law history and the period when God's judgment is being poured out. All this is not referring to 9/11. So far, we have seen that, or we're, what's the word, pondering, thinking about where the close of probation, where this fire is. We know it's not in the 9/11, 2001, 9/11, but is that the Sunday law? Is it at the close of probation? So maybe it's at the Sunday law and the close of probation, and 9/11 is the harbinger. So let's just keep those things in mind. That it's not 9/11 is harbinger, and it seems to talking about close of probation, fire, destruction, at the Sunday law, and at the close of probation. We just have to figure those out. But it seems to be talking about maybe 3 places. 9/11, however, looks exactly the same as the Sunday law history. And we can use that information to begin to create a structure of first there was the church, and then there was the world. When you do that, you can begin to demonstrate that Revelation 18 is fulfilled here in 9/11 as a harbinger that looks like the actual fulfillment in the history of the Sunday law, which is what is written. So here, it's Sunday law, but it's a Sunday law history. So could it be the history between the Sunday law and the close of probation? So what we're doing is just what the wise men did, but in a much more sophisticated fashion. 9/11 was the warning to God's church. What Ellen White is talking about is the warning that will come upon the world. We need to be more careful in our reading. For far too long, we have not been careful in our reading. We have not looked for structures in God's word. We need to do both of these things in order to gather maximum understanding from God's word. We're coming to a time period where the harvest is going to begin in God's church. First, the first fruit, and then the main harvest. When those people are harvested, they are gathered together. This is the message. We need to get our message correct. We must get our message in agreement with the Word of God. When we are dealing with harbingers, we should understand that. We should know the difference between what we see and what we read. We should read contextually. So when Ellen White talks about the buildings being destroyed, we should understand that she's talking about the history of the Sunday law and the plagues. History, and when do the plagues come?
Yeah, see, there was a paragraph that you read just a few places back where she says the Sunday law and she's doing the same thing here, or he is, the Sunday law and the plagues. If you back up just a little bit, I think you just went back to it and reread it a minute ago. I'll be able to see it. It was just a little short sentence. Keep going a little bit more. Keep going. Right before this one, I think. Yeah, back up to where you can see the beginning of that sentence. So what is being referred to is, scroll down, what is being referred to is the Sunday law history and the period when God's judgment is being poured out. I think what he's saying is two histories. And that's what the other sentence that you just read seems to be suggesting too. Two different histories or two different dispensations.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I think so. It's right
that
here.
makes
So,
that makes sense, because that's what the line of Balaam is showing.
that it's two, the Sunday law and close of probation.
Well, there's three if you count 9/11,
Right.
and that's what the line of Balaam was showing.
So when Ellen White talks about the buildings being destroyed, we should understand that she's talking about the history of the Sunday law and the plagues. So we have to know, when
9/11,
are the plagues? When are the plagues? They're not in the Sunday law history, right?
after the close of probation.
So he's twice now referenced the Sunday law and close of probation as two separate places that he's talking about. Does that
Okay,
make sense? That's how I read that.
that's how I read it too. But that was what was plaguing my mind when in the Balaam there was 3 times that Islam
right.
shows up.
Right. So maybe that helps answer your questions for the Balaam line.
Yeah, and I was thinking, am I right in this? So okay,
So what he's talking about two different dispensations here, the Sunday law and the close of probation.
yes, okay. Now that makes more sense what I was thinking.
That seems apparent to me too at this point with the discussion.
Yeah, because yeah, Sunday law and the plagues, and not
Because- And if you go into, well, many books in the Bible, Jeremiah is fresh in my mind, because first comes, you have the rebellion. I think it was Bob that brought up the rebellion. If not, it was somebody else. I apologize. You have the rebellion, and because of the rebellion, who comes and destroys?
Babylon.
Babylon. And because I think it was the way it was worded, Babylon oversteps their level of destruction, then who comes in?
Islam.
Islam. So when are God's people, when does on the church, when does the door shut on the church as an institution? Sunday law, right?
Yes.
So that's let me think of how to say this. With Jeremiah, I'm thinking of that's Zedekiah. That's at the time of Zedekiah, where Babylon comes in and the final conquering, right? And then there's the stragglers that get left there, and they get appointed a governor to watch over them. And it's in that time, because that marks the Sunday law. Zedekiah marks the Sunday law, and it's at that time the people, they go to Jeremiah and say, go ask God what we're supposed to do, and whatever God says that we will do, because God already knows they have a plan. we're going to leave Jerusalem. We're going to go to the world. We're going to go to Egypt, the world, because we want Egypt to protect us. And they have to learn that you were rebellious. You're not protected. Babylon destroyed you. And now you want to go to the world, which is even more rebellion, because the only one that can protect you is me. If that made sense.
Yes.
And that's the history of the Sunday law too. And then you have Islam. So you're going to learn that the world can't protect you because Babylon comes in and conquers you because of your rebellion. And now you continue in that rebellion, and the world's not going to save you because Islam's going to come in and wipe out everything. Yeah, it will be awful, Susan.
Yes. Okay.
So the 911 is a harbinger for both Sunday law and close of probation. Are we stretching the time period?
Stretch it. I mean, I think let Phil answer that. Sorry.
Okay, so I think what Elder Parminder was saying, that we thought that 9/11 was the event. And that was because of our careless reading. But when we read carefully, Sunday law is the event that Ellen White is talking about in Testimony Volume 9, page 11. And then when we do more careful reading, Ellen White up there says, you know, we just read, what did we just read? Up here, we just,
When there's no more forbearance, if that's what you're talking about.
yeah, the one you just had me go back to.
Oh, the one right here, right there. What is being referred to is, no, scroll down, back down. It's the very last sentence of that page, begins there. What is being referred to is the Sunday law history and the period when God's judgment is being poured out. So you have the Sunday law history, and then you have this history when God's judgment is being poured out. And God's
Yes.
judgment, what is God's judgment? What's the instrument of God's judgment that's poured out?
It's the plagues.
Yeah, it does say that later, the plagues, but I was in Islam, right?
Yes.
The whole subject here is Islam. That's the tool in God's hand. The scourge against the false religion that's a scourge against the apostate church.
Yes. So it seems like what it's saying, what she's saying, Elder Parminder is saying, is through that whole history from Sunday law until the probation, until the probation closes, which then comes the plague, so all the way to the second advent.
Right, all the way to the second advent.
Yes.
So we have two histories that he's referring to here that he, I guess, is saying she's referring to here. And the two histories are Sunday law to close of probation and then close of probation to second advent.
Yes. Yeah, so that makes sense in the line of Balaam. It will, yeah, when we get to that, yeah, what we're just discussing now, that'll become more apparent.
Good, I look forward to it.
This is enlightening. All right, and the plagues and not 9/11. Okay, how we deal with 9/11 is also an inspired fulfillment of Numbers 24 and Matthew 2 that was read in Desire of Ages 44, as these men understand the relationship between 9/11, the Sunday law, and the close of probation. So we need to know what was the harbinger and what is the destruction. Okay, now we return to the main study. So don't try to calculate time. Don't think about how long a presidency is. 4 years, and there could be a second term, which then will be 8 years. 8 years could be quite a long time, but you must not think that way because you have no idea what's going to happen. And that's so true. We have a little idea because back in 1798, France is going to come back into history here at our Sunday law. What does that mean? Of course, it's not literal France. What was going on in France in 1798? The French Revolution. We don't know why it was called a revolution when it should have been called a civil war. If you check the history, it was a civil war between the rich and the poor. This is going to be repeated. You should know that there was the issue of slavery in 1798. The French colonies began to assert their rights, and the issues of slavery was brought up. In America, the issue of slavery was also brought up, but this issue wasn't addressed properly in either country. In some of their colonies, the only way they got their rights was to revolt against their masters, even though their rights were protected in the Constitution. At the end of the world, there will be another revolution in the US, which will be very similar. It's going to have all the characteristics of the French Revolution. So now here we're talking about civil war, the poor and the rich. You can already see it happening now. You hear it everywhere in the news. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Some of the things that triggered the French Revolution was a famine, and it broke the French economy. Also, one of the things that bankrupted France was their hatred for the English. They hated the English. And I don't know if any of you have read just a recent article about how much, who was it? Bezos, Prime, Amazon, who else? Tesla, Musk, and well, I can't remember all the rich people that was named in this article. But in three short months, in the time of COVID, in 3 short months, just the handful of rich individuals gained, I think if I remember the figure correctly, $17 trillion.
That rings a bell, yeah.
$17 trillion, while everybody else was going the opposite direction. So
they have the money to solve the problems of the world,
they do.
and they won't. Which is why James says, "Woe to you, rich man."
Yeah.
Weep and howl.
So what they did, because America was at war with the English, the French started to finance the Americans. Because the French were worried about themselves, they said, let's go to war with someone else. And that is what bankrupted France. It will take only a small amount of things that will bankrupt America. They already spent most of their money attacking other countries instead of taking care of themselves. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. When this happens in the United States, it will spread to other countries because most of the European countries are all the same. People like us, the majority of the people, have no idea of the wealth of these people. If you can only imagine how much money they have, I can't even imagine. I don't know what $17 trillion looks like.
You can't even spend it.
No. It far exceeds the rich during the French Revolution. We're headed for civil war. The shaking of the earth, 9/11, has already begun, and it's not going to stop. Now, so Barbara F. Walter, she's an expert in international security, author of How Civil War Starts and How to Stop Them. Professor of Political Science, Rohr Chair in Pacific International Relations, And I got this from the excerpt from the Kenneth N. Waltz Lecture in International Relations. And the title of that lecture was, is the United States heading towards a second civil war? And this lecture was last year, March 22nd, 2022. Would anybody like to read this? Give me a little break.
I will if nobody else does, but I'll give somebody else a chance first. It always helps me. But I'll give somebody else a chance first. Then you make the call.
Okay, well, no one has spoke up. Elaine, would you read, please?
Okay. So Miss Walter has been studying civil wars of various countries for over 30 years. She was invited to join the Political Instability Task Force of the CIA. The task was to predict, looking at different variables: 1, political instability; 2, civil war; and 3, adverse regime change. The task force came up with over 30 different social variables. Her expertise, however, was in the Civil War. This issue, therefore, will be the focus. Out of 30 social variables, primarily 2 stood out prominently: anocracy, is that how you say that word? Anocracy?
Yes.
And ethnic factionalization. Anocracy is defined as a semi-democracy where it's neither fully democratic nor fully autocratic. It may lean towards democracy, but not fully. Political participation is not fully open, and the election process is not fully free and fair. Ethnic factionalization is defined as where citizens who unite and organize themselves politically, not around ideology, such as conservative, liberals, or Democrats, but around identity. So instead of having traditional parties formed from ideology, you have political parties based on religion, race, and/or ethnicity. So the combination of these 2 variables puts countries at high risk of a civil war. I don't know if anybody saw, just pause real quick on that. Trying to remember his name. Anyways, I think he was a Democrat from back in the Clinton era. I can't remember his name, but there was a video on him this morning talking about Mike Johnson. That's the speaker's name, right? Mike Johnson. And
Yes.
that he was saying that he poses a bigger threat than Al-Qaeda, which we know that who's going to come in the end and destroy, but just repeating what he said, that Mike Johnson is more, but what he was saying is is where he comes from, his background, and how he was molded, shaped, and into this Christian white nationalism. And that was more dangerous, more of a threat. And at this point, you could see that is what is causing the fall of the United States, is this Christian white nationalism. But then it brings on Islam. Can't think of his name. Okay, so since it was the CIA who was tasked with this mission, they were not allowed to mention, study, examine, etc., about what was happening in the United States. Ms. Walter, however, who was not part of the CIA, realizing what was happening in the United States, was attempting to sound a warning bell of the conditions that were brewing in the United States. So who tends to start civil wars? Generally, we tend to think of the uprising of the poor or the minorities rising up against the rich and the powerful. This certainly is a variable, but more often than not, civil wars are based on religion, race, or ethnicity. The ethnic groups that tend to start civil wars are the groups that had once been in power, dominant and in control, but had either lost the power or they're in the process of decline and they want to regain or hold on to the power. Often migration and demographic changes are cited for the decline or the loss of power. Many incidents.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Looking at the previous paragraph you just read, if you go back, paragraph right up there. Okay, right there, it says that often than not, civil wars are based on, it says religion, race, or ethnicity. But I'm looking at the fact that we're staring right down the barrel of looking at gender equality. And I don't even see that that's even mentioned as an issue here. And I know that some of these other things might be levers that are used for leverage to cause some of these things to happen. But I just can't help but think that the biggest one that they're staring at is recognizing that there's just not equality across human beings. I'm seeing that that's not being mentioned at all here in this particular spot.
Correct.
Oh, but I see that it is a factor. So anyway,
You want to comment, Phil?
Yeah, well, we see it, we recognize it because our eyes have been opened to patriarchy and what patriarchy leads to. But the world doesn't see patriarchy. They live it, but they don't see it as a problem. So the variable of patriarchy is not even an issue for them. It just is. And so for them, it's either religion with which or culture, ethnicity, race. That's all. That's all cultural, right, which patriarchy is embedded in. But because they're engulfed in it, they don't see it. So we're able to recognize it because God has opened our eyes.
Can I say something on that? I think that's for this author who wrote that, because I believe there are people in the world who do recognize patriarchy, especially when that is feminism is a civil rights issue where women are standing up for their rights or gender equality. So that's something in the world that has that people are aware of, the inequality. I don't think it's just us who recognize that.
Right. Sure. They do recognize it. But it causes backlash and it's always squashed. And because it's squashed at almost instantaneously, it's not an issue. It doesn't cause a civil war because it takes another long time for the oppressed gender to rise up again. And then it's almost immediately squashed. So it's never a long process of continuous fighting. So even though it's, yes, recognized by few, because it is constantly squashed, there's no opportunity for it to rise to the level of war.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing is that I think there is a long fight, because just like in race, there's a long fight. There will be some who say that the fight is still not over. There's much more to to fight for, just like in feminism, or when the fight against sexism or patriarchy, that it is a long fight. But I believe that in both ends there are backlashes. But I think that maybe the way it's fought is, and I'm not saying that that they're winning, or however this is probably not the right way to be saying it, but just in the sense of fighting for women's rights or civil rights, that it is a long fight. But maybe the way that is fought out is different. It's not like an actual battle or like we have seen, or I don't know. But those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, no, those are all good, valid thoughts. What I meant was that what I meant by long, yes, it is long. I mean, it's been going on for ages. So in that sense, yes, it's long. But I guess what I meant was it can't be sustained. That same level of, because they're constantly squashed, they can't sustain that same level of intensity. It's like when we watched When We Rise, there was always that squashing down until they all came together. And then it became more powerful. But then even then, it got squashed. And now, like the Me Too movement, it got squashed. So yes, it is prolonged, but the intensity of the sustaining of it, it's just not there.
I want to read what Mary put in, and then the thoughts that I was having just before she put in there, and then Christine has her hand up. Sorry. But embedded in religion and race wars is sexism. Any progress that is brought by secularism and the work of democracy is a trigger for I think it's supposed to be severe backlash from these cultural and religious identities. The example, the rise of the Taliban rolls back women's rights. Loss of women's rights is clear marker for us, marking where we are on the big reform line. Because I was looking at that, what's being brought up here is religion, race, or ethnicity. So I looked up ethnicity. I was going to ask, and everybody was talking ethnicity, the quality or fact of belonging to a population, group, or subgroup made up of people who share a common cultural background or descent. So you have religion, which is patriarchy. Race is also patriarchy. And you have ethnicity, which is cultural, which is patriarchy. Embedded in this, and I think that's the point Mary's making, because embedded in this is where it brings us to these loss of women's rights. Is that what you're saying, Mary? Yeah, okay. And then I'll leave it to Phil, but Christine has her hand up. Sorry.
Go ahead, Christine.
Is it possible that it won't come to a civil war between men and women because women aren't, for the most part, willing to pick up a gun to get their way where men are? I'm just saying.
Yeah, that could be also true. But for some reason, it has never, that has never become, the inequality has never become to a point of civil war.
Because women won't pick up the gun to force their way.
It's the invisibleness of patriarchy. I think that's what Bob was saying. The invisibleness of patriarchy behind the scenes. Somebody said that, but
Yeah, it's there. It's there.
it's there. It's invisible behind there because they don't see it. We see it, as you said, because we've been enlightened.
Yes.
So it
Very
is
good
all about
discussion.
power, dominance, and control, which it says that.
Absolutely. Okay, where were we?
I think on that next paragraph or the paragraph below it. Yeah, that next paragraph. Many incidents of different countries that led to civil wars or civil instabilities can be seen as examples. Israelis and the Palestinians can be seen as, the Catholic Philippines and the Moros, the Irish Catholics in England. We will briefly look at the history of Yugoslavia after the fall of the Soviet Union. When we examine the question, who tends to start a civil war, we also need to consider the phenomenon of what's called the sons of the soil, the idea of we were here first, this is our land, this is our country, it belongs to us, etc. I was also thinking as we were discussing that and reading that is if you could back up just a little bit, if I don't lose that train of thought. It had to do with the lines of it being invisible. We have all these moving parts of this message. Oh, 2016, going back again to 2016. What effect would it have had for the United States to have a president that promoted and stood for and was a radical feminist and stood for the rights of women and the rights of the LGBTQ community? What would that have done to this, all this invisibility of patriarchy embedded into all their battles? That's all about dominance and control. What would the difference have been in the United States and the world if 2016 had turned a different way? Just a thought. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia was free to choose the type of government for their country. They chose democracy and held elections. This, however, created a dilemma for the communists who once held power. Slobodan, because now they don't have power and they're not happy when they don't have power. Slobodan Milosevic, a true blood communist, now had to compete for power. At that period, you could see where the women come in there, what we're talking about as well, with the women being raped and how they're going to go in, why they use women for this. If they've lost their power, what's the best way to you've lost your power, you're going to go attack their women and put the other side down. So how women wind up being a part of it. So at that period, Serbs were the largest ethnic group. He convinced the Serbs to band together regardless of their ideology. He convinced the Serbs that if the I don't know if it's Croatians, right?
Yeah, Croats.
Okay. The other ethnic group got elected, they would oppress the Serbs. This was the propaganda that Milosevic continued to promote. Fear-mongering, existential threat to the Serbs, stick together or else, etc. Yugoslavia was experiencing anarchy. Milosevic took advantage of the weak democracy and used identity rather than ideology to gather support. Political parties were being formed around ethnicity rather than ideology. So isn't that where the United States is kind of at this anocracy stage?
Yes, I was just going to
Yes.
say that. Yeah, it's exactly what's happening. And then the people rise up looking for somebody to get us back to normal again. And where we're seeing this is a worldwide movement of countries going to the very far right. And that has an impact to promise the people that there's a solution, that they see everything falling apart and these leaders have the solution, just like Hitler in the time of the Second World War. You can look back in history and see all this happening. It's just a repeat of what we see now, although we've got a worldwide movement going on, which I'm seeing. We read a paragraph here about migration. Why are people migrating? Climate change is taking over. And people are suffering under, horrendous weather problems, which causes an increase of people to travel and move and get away from, to go somewhere else. And where are they going to go? These people that are poor and have nothing. And I was remembering what we read from The Economist. There was 10 points. Do you remember that, Elaine?
Say that again.
The 10 points from The Economist. What's his name? I'm trying to think of his name now. But a lot of economists are speaking up about this because there's so many factions involved in it. It's climate change, it's AI, it's
the 10 risks. Yeah.
the 10 risks. Yes, we're seeing this happen right now before our very eyes. All these things are coming together. It's not just one thing, but it's a lot of issues that are, Robini, thank you, Susan, that are taking place, that are bringing us to this point of where, human suffering, and of course, patriarchy is the root of the whole problem, and it's causing all of this to rise its head, where maybe people will see even more and more that this is patriarchal when the loud cry comes. I mean, it's already leading up to this, to the Sunday law. And all the, yeah, Susan, all the climate change disasters and everything. So, yeah, I just wanted to express that because we're actually seeing this happening right now before our eyes.
So
And it's going to get worse and worse.
if you go back to the Millerite history, the abolitionists, they were successful, therefore there was no Sunday law. Come to our history, feminism failed, therefore there's a Sunday law. Again, that takes me back to 2016 and the way the election went.
Mhm.
Feminism failed, therefore there's a Sunday law. So if I understand that correctly, had feminism succeeded, had Hillary Clinton been president, and you had a president that's a radical feminist and about women's rights and LGBTQ rights, then you wouldn't have had a Sunday law. So all this other stuff is all, it's all bringing us to that Sunday law, but the test that what the world was supposed to be warned on was gender and patriarchy. And they're not getting that warning. They don't get that warning. And it's therefore the Sunday law comes. That's the way I understand it.
That's the result of not getting the warning
Right,
that we would have gotten if Hillary Clinton had been elected.
right.
Yeah, I see that. Very far-reaching consequences.
Yes. And you can't see it on the day-to-day. You can only see it when you pull back and look at the big picture. And all the picture that Elder Tess brought to us with the Midnight Cry and all the studies going forward, and also the methodology that Elder Parmenter brought to see the lines and the structures, so you can pull back and look at the big picture and see all these pieces, and they merge together to make the clear picture. But the people can't
Absolutely.
see that picture because we went the wrong direction. Turning point in 2016.
Exactly.
Elaine?
Yeah, now
I-
it's clear. Now it's clear that we're getting clarity. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just saying, as you guys are talking, I'm not trying to interrupt you at all. I just wanted to just chime in and say, wow, I look at myself and I just realize how myopic, I'm speaking of myself, not anybody else, how myopic I was with everything and not being able to take in what we call the big picture. I wasn't seeing the big picture at all. In fact, I was in denial for the longest time. So I'm just, you know,
And myself as well. Thank you.
You ever put together jigsaw puzzles, Bob?
oh yeah, I love putting together jigsaw puzzles, but I never connected those dots.
Do you want me to keep going, Phil?
Yes, please. I think
Okay.
we're at let's explore.
Okay, let's explore the idea of the sons of the soil a bit more. As it has been stated, civil war is not primarily caused by economic reasons, but by the deep emotional sense of the loss of status, the loss of power. There is this sense that they deserve to govern or continue to govern because they have been there the longest. They were the majority. They have been in power longer, and anything less is not acceptable. Let's bring this home to the US soil. Had the CIA task force been allowed to study what was going on in the United States, they would have had to admit that, yes, there is not only ethnic factionalization, but super ethnic factionalization, where one political party is predominantly racially white, has predominantly one religion, evangelical, and predominantly from rural areas rather than geographically urban areas. This is a trifecta: race, religion, and geography represented in one political party, which we can add is patriarchal. And Mike Johnson, who posted the article on, maybe it was Penny, somebody posted an article, there were a couple articles about Mike Johnson, where he stands with the no-fault divorce. Patriarchal. Democracy in the United States has been declining Mary says, so 2016 feminism failed and those who could have given the warning are not even on the scene. The world is not getting warning from regards to gender. Okay. That's how I understand it anyways. Hopefully that's right, but that's how I understand it. Democracy in the United States has been declining for the past 6 years. The Center for Systemic Peace has been measuring the US since the late 1900s. In 2016, it was downgraded from a +10 to +8 because the election, while it was deemed free, was not fair. Okay, so this is taking us to 2016. I'm gonna reread that again if you don't mind, because I was distracted a little bit. So democracy in the United States has been declining in the past 6 years. The Center for Systemic Peace has been measuring the US since the late 1900s. In 2016, it was downgraded from a +10 to a +8 because the election, while it was deemed free, was not fair. There was partisan meddling as well as meddling by Russia. In 2019, it was downgraded again to +7 because of the free rein given to the executive branch under Trump. One of the primary functions of the Congress is to keep in check the power of the executive. But one of the branches of the Congress conceded their power to the executive. Trump, therefore, didn't have to cooperate with the Congress and basically did what he wanted. After the 2020 election, it was once again downgraded to +5. During Biden's term, it has been upgraded to +8. Tensions have been brewing among the white working class with loss of good paying jobs because of trade agreements such as NAFTA. The divide of the racial groups can be seen after the Obama election of 2008. Many white working class Democrats began to gravitate towards the Republican Party. The Republicans were also pursuing the evangelical Christians at the expense of other religious groups. Today, the Republican Party is 90% white, predominantly evangelicals. The United States has been experiencing, and we'll add, they're patriarchal. United States has been experiencing anocracy. Whoops, I think you went a little too far, did you? Anocracy, and has become ethnically factionalized. The US should have been placed on the watch list. Free and fair elections are critical to democracy. If one group continues to lose a series of elections, it's an indication that the group does not have the numbers demographically to compete, given the existing political system. When you see clearly that you do not have the numbers to get the votes in order to stay in power, you have to turn to extra legal means. Isn't this everything we've been talking about?
Oh,
Lays it out.
yes.
What are those
Very
legal matters? Is that gerrymandering?
It's one of
Yes.
them.
All the stuff that they're doing in the courts? Okay. So the Republican Party knows that if they cannot win elections, if they continue to appeal exclusively to the white evangelicals, they will not have sufficient votes. They do not have the numbers to win elections. If they want to maintain political power, the only way they can do this is to unravel the guardrail of our democracy and slowly cement in minority rule. They have no incentive to reform our political system because a reformed political system will mean that they will be out of power. Their best strategy is to lead the US into anocracy and straight into shipwreck. This was a book, right? You pulled this from a book or an article?
From a lecture.
From a lecture, okay. The census data of 2014 revealed that the majority of births in the United States were non-white. The white population of the United States became really scared. After this, we saw an increase in white supremacy. Is that supposed to be 20? Oh yeah, by 2045, it is predicted that there will be a demographic shift where whites will be the minority, and we won't make it, I don't believe, to 2045. I'm sure we won't. So what does a civil war look like today? It's not the bloody conflict we imagine it was in the 1860s. It would be foolish to challenge the military might of the United States. Instead, how the far right is going to defeat the US government is laid out in Turner Diaries, the Bible of the far right, which is comparable to Hitler's Mein Kampf. It is it's a decentralized, leaderless cell warfare to create chaos. They target civilians, state infrastructures, moderates in their own party who are seen as a threat to their more extreme views. They do acts of violence such as storming the Capitol, taking opposition leaders, and killing them if they could. I think I turn it back over to you here.
Thank you for reading. Yeah, so she laid it all out. of
That was
what-
good, yeah.
Amazing find.
I'll be back. You go ahead, but I gotta run for just a minute.
Okay, so we're going to be returning to the main study. Numbers 22. What are we going to talk about? The United States. Who is the prophet? Balaam. He's going to put a curse on God's people. How is he going to get there? He's going to ride on a donkey. He wants to take control and bring destruction to God's people. Here we are at 9/11. Balaam is on the path riding on the donkey, and there's an angel. And the angel is going to tell the donkey what to do. Who's controlling the donkey? Balaam has hold of the reins, telling the donkey which way to go, but the angel is telling the donkey to go in a different direction. Who is the angel? Well, maybe the first angel. So there's this angel blocking the path of Balaam on the donkey. Angel has a sword in his hand. And what is a sword? The Bible. When the donkey sees the path blocked by the angel, the donkey goes another way. The donkey goes off into the field. What does Balaam do? He beats the donkey. In essence, he restrains the donkey and gets it back on the path. That's 9/11. They continue on the path. What does verse 23 say? There's a relationship between the US and Islam. America wants to control Islam, but it's not going to work. Now, verse 24, as they continue, they run into a problem because they come to a place on the path where there are walls on both sides. The angel blocks their way again, and the donkey cannot get off the path. So what does he do? Verse 25, the angel smashes into the wall, causing Balaam's foot to be crushed. So there is a crushing of Balaam's foot. What is the symbol for the wall? A wall represents law. There will be some kind of law that is going to be placed at this point. Before the Sunday law, there's the midnight cry, the empowerment of the second angel. At 9/11, there's the empowerment of the first angel. At the midnight cry, there's the empowerment of the second angel, verses 26 and 27. Though it becomes very narrow, we're at the third step. What can the donkey do? It can't go anywhere. It just collapses to the ground. Balaam can't go anywhere. At the Sunday law, the third angel becomes empowered. At the first step, Balaam gets taken off the path. At the second step, his foot gets crushed. At the third step, he just collapses. What we're suggesting is this. The economy of the US went out of direction on 9/11. The whole world suffered. The economy of the US at the midnight cry will be crushed because Islam will attack America again during the presidency of the 45th president. In Sunday law, now these are my words, in the red brackets, moral economy of the US will collapse. So I'm saying it's going to be a total collapse, not just economy. This causes the economical collapse of the whole world. Things are going from bad to worse. We have a little bit of time for safety. Our focus should be on the Sunday law. We need to think about the midnight cry.
hold on one second, sorry. I was muted,
ahead.
I was trying to talk, my bad. You put in moral in there, right? Because I know, I think it was articles that I have been reading, have been saying the same thing with where the United States is headed. It's going to have a moral fall. I'm trying to remember the articles that I've read, but I've seen that in a couple of different articles that, when you come to the 2024 election and Trump, that the United States takes a moral fall. I don't know if anybody else has been seeing that.
Yeah, I see that too. It just reminded me of the economical collapse would be, and where is that found? I'm not sure if it's Ellen White's writings or the Bible. The merchants of the earth, it
Yeah.
says. Does anyone know where that is? That's
18
because the merchants are
18.
going to suffer.
Revelation 18,
Yeah. Yeah, the buy and sell
the
thing.
economy.
Exactly. It's collapsing.
Elaine,
Yeah,
Troy, can you just repeat your question or what your statement about the moral fall 2024?
just referencing a couple of articles, which I can't remember which ones they are, but I know I've seen this mentioned in some of the articles I've been reading that, and I'm pretty sure it was connected to the Trump and everything that's happening in the 2024 election. And if it goes that direction, then the United States suffers a moral fall. I'm sorry, I can't give any references right now. I just know that I've been seeing that. Either I've seen it in the Spirit of Prophecy that I've been reading and or also articles, because we're looking at the external prophets, the journalists, right? And the journalists are seeing, the external prophets are seeing what's going to be the condition of the United States with another Trump term, another Trump presidency.
Okay, thanks for repeating.
Mhm.
We need to think about the midnight cry. We know that it comes before the Sunday law. We received the first warning at the time of the end. Then we received the second warning at 9/11. That was the role of radical Islam in Bible prophecy. Today, the church says that this is all foolishness. Their opposition to this message is published in their church papers, just as it was in the time of Christ. The messenger was there at 9/11, and the church did not accept him. So there's two lines that I'm working on. I would like us to work on. One is Balaam, and the other one is this. This is what I was working on. This is not part of Elder Parmender's presentation. So these are, like I said, my study, contemplation, suggestion of Dr. Kaus and company. That's us. So what I'm going to do is I am going to bypass this. Let's see, page there. And finish up this study. And hopefully, the next Sabbath, we can get to both lines. So the Lord raised up new people from many walks of life to give the message of radical Islam. Once you get to 9/11, we have no time to waste. Because that midnight cry, or loud cry, when Islam attacks for the second time, the US economy will be crushed. Perhaps you will lose your jobs. The government will come to nothing. If you haven't made preparation, you will be swept away. Come Sunday law, everything will collapse. Everything will be done away with. All of that is in agreement with the great controversy. We are just filling in the details. In closing, we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of details that we need to know because it's in the details that our characters are changed. and not just through surface studies. You know, it's funny that Elder Parminder said that we're just only the tip of the iceberg. Because to me, this was deep. But there's so much more to learn, as he puts it. We have to go back and open our Bibles and study for ourselves. And when you do that, it'll be your experience. Review and Herald, November 22nd, 1892, First Selected Message, 362.4. It says that the time of the test is just upon us. It says that the loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ. This is the beginning of the light of the angel of glory to fill the whole earth. Revelation 18:1. The time of the test is before us, and the angel has already come. For it is the work of everyone to whom the message of warning has come to lift up Jesus. So we lift up Jesus. To lift up Jesus, to present Jesus to the world, to the people, we must do it in types, as shadowed in symbols. So it's not the Jesus that we think we know, the man who walked through Israel. Jesus that we present is in the types, shadows, and symbols. There are people who think that they are preaching the third angel's message, the warning message. They're doing it literally, morally, or they're simply taking the gospel stories and they're not correctly teaching the third angel's message. It's really easy to know who is teaching the third angel's message properly. We talk about Jesus in types, shadowed in symbols, and figures. We must study our Bibles, make preparations, because we are near the end. But there is still time to be saved. And that is the conclusion of the study. Any comments? I know we've been making a lot of contributions along the way, which I am so grateful.
I was just thinking about the third angel again, what we've been looking at. It's really easy to know who is teaching the third angel's message properly. So who's teaching the third angel's message? What is the third angel?
It's the message and the messengers. We are.
Yeah, because you have the churches, right? In each church, Revelation, the 7 churches, each church had a messenger. So you have a messenger, but it's the movement that is the third angel. If we can all accept that.
That is our duty and responsibility.
Yeah.
I think part of our responsibility is to wake up and realize that God is trying to enable us to have foresight and not just hindsight, because hindsight is easy to see. Everybody will agree in the end that, yeah, this was right, this was it, this is that. But to be able to have the wisdom to be able to see it on the front end and to act on it in a timely manner that's going to be the saving of souls, that's what's important.
Yes. Thank you for the study, Phil. So next week you'll go through the lines. Is that what you want to do then?
Yes, next week, if the spots are available, the lines of Balaam and the lines of the line of the man of God from Judah. The man of God from Judah, that parable is found in First Kings chapter 13. If you want to look at it and read it, study it, so we can make contributions. And Balaam is the portion that I'm taking, because Balaam is a long story. I think it's a couple of chapters. But the portion that I'm taking for Balaam is found in Numbers 22, verses 22 to 31. So Numbers 22, 22 to 31, and Kings chapter 13.
Yeah, good idea to read.
First Kings. Yeah, First Kings.
Yeah, good idea to review them before next week. Well, this is good. It gives us a lot of um, things to think about and good discussion along the way. Nice find on that article too, that lecture. And able to pick it apart. And I was thinking about the articles that we read last night, to be able to remember that the department said, I don't even know what sifting means, but to be able to sift past the stuff that doesn't fit what we're understanding to get to the parts that we do need to understand. And so the whole articles, those articles on rape and war, it's not all the details and who does it and the bias that's involved. It's just looking at I think it's right to say the surface level of the story, even though we need to get down inside. I understand that, but the surface level of the story, just to get the general principle of the story, and that's the gender abuse in the rapes in war is the main point of what we pulled out of that last night. So that article that you shared in here, the lecture that you shared in here, was the same thing. It's being able to dig in and see patriarchies involved in all of those things that it listed. And nobody sees the patriarchy because they don't get the warning.
Looking at all the studies that you folks do from week to week and month to month, I just stand completely amazed at how much wisdom is actually available to us if we would just open our eyes and allow God to show it to us, because it's right there if we could see it. We just have to be able to see it, and I praise God for how he's helping us to see stuff, because God knows, as you said, Elaine, there's a whole lot more for us to learn. That's for sure.
Yeah. I'm sure Phil was blessed by putting this together.
Oh, yes, very, very much so. It was, I was very blessed, and it was very pleasurable, knowing that, you just know, you have this sense that when things fall into place, that God is leading. Like when I just started out with, the ninth video, what we started with. And then all of a sudden I got a thought from, just a thought, to go to the Harbinger and how it just fits in. And then I got a thought to go into the Civil War, and how I don't even know who she is. How did I even find Barbara F. Walters? And so God is leading, and there's a sense of pleasure that I can be used, that I'm good for something. When most of your life you've been told you're good for nothing, and God tells you, no, you're good for something.
Amen.